All right. Well, now that we've made a few pivot tables, we understand how to put multiple columns and multiple rows on there, learn how to sum things up, and you see how good pivot tables are as being a tool to look at your data. Let's put some fun elements on there. Now, we've done some filtering with pivot tables through the arrows on the top of the column headings, but in this module, we're going to look at slicers and timelines. Now, these are just more interactive ways to be able to filter and drill down into your data on your pivot table. So let's go to the slicers and timelines dashboard and let's look at what we have here, and then we're going to delete them and build them again. So if you notice over to the left, I have a customer name. It's kind of a box here with all the customers in our pivot table. So what I can do with this is I can just click on a customer and it automatically filters down to that customer. And if I want to get rid of that filter, up here is a clear filter button. The other two slicers are at the top. I've got an employee slicer that shows all the employees, all the salespeople, and then a state or province. So I could click on Wisconsin and see all of the customers and categories and sales in Wisconsin. And I could see the different salespeople. I could look at Andrew's sales, or I could look at Laura's or Michael's. Now, another thing to notice about these slicers is once you click on one, like I filtered on Wisconsin, the other slicers in that pivot table, they automatically filter out the choices that are valid for whatever you've selected. So here, I still see all the employee names, but only the ones that are in the current view are highlighted. Same thing with customer. It's all the bright dog customer. So if I click on another employee, the pivot table will be blank. There's no data for that. So I'll go ahead and clear that out. And the timeline really has to do with the dates. It's a different way to filter the dates. So here I'm on Q1 to Q2 of 2020, and I've got the quarters here. So I can click on quarter one, and it filters to Jan, February, March, or quarter two, April, May, or June, and I can also slide it. Now I can't go to 3 or 4 because my data doesn't have anything past June. But what I can do is over on the right here, you can choose what level you want the timeline to filter at. I can do years if I want. I've only got 1 year, or quarters, or months, or even days. So here's all the days from January through February through March. So I can just click on a day there. I can click on several. And it's a really fun and neat tool to work with dates. All right, go back here. What I'm going to do for this one is just keep it on months. And then I'll just say January, and I can drag this out to June again. And that's kind of how the timeline works. Well, now that we've seen how they work, let's go ahead and delete them and show you how to build slicers and timelines. So like I said before, they're basically just drawing objects when they're all done. So if you click on one, you get the little sizing handles. I can go ahead and hit the delete key on my keyboard just to get rid of it. So let's just delete all these slicers and timelines. And then we'll click on our pivot table. Now previously, whenever we click on the pivot table, we're going to work over on the right with pivot table fields, but not for slicers and timelines. We still have to be on the pivot table, but then we go to the pivot table analyze menu, and we've got insert slicer and timeline. So let's do slicers first. And we wanted a customer, we wanted employee and state, and let's choose category. Now the neat thing about the insert slicers is that you can insert multiple slicers at the same time. And watch what happens there. They all come up here and they're kind of, staggered over each other and they're kind of overlapping, but they'll still work. If I click on an employee, it still filters that person. If I click on a customer, it still filters there, and I can take these off. So what we can do now is we can move these around and format them and shape them to fit our pivot table. So I'm going to go here to employee and drag that up here. And I'm going to go over to customer name. And then I'll go to state. And actually, I don't want category. So I can just click on it and hit the delete key again. Now for right now, I'm going to take freeze panes off. That'll be important in a few minutes here. But now let's work with customer name. If it's not showing all the values, you get a scroll bar here, and you can scroll down, and it's still a pretty interesting control. It's much better if you can see all the choices. So let's grab that bottom sizing handle and see if we can get there. Yep, all of my choices will fit on that slicer. So let's go up here and change it a little bit. Now that I'm on the slicer, I also have a slicer ribbon. So I'll click on the slicer menu and I'll just pick this style right here. Get a green style and it looks pretty nice. So let's look at the employee and state ones. They've got a lot of entries and we got a lot of space up here. So let's just take this, drag it over here, and same thing here. I'll take state and drag it over here. And I'll keep sizing it a little bit to make it just right. You can spend time, as much time as you want on that later. So now I've got employee. Got a lot of space here, but I don't want to have to scroll this list. So on my slicer ribbon, over to the right, I've got a columns control. And here's where I can have the slicer have multiple columns. So now I've got 3 rows and 3 columns of employees. Looks about the right size. Let me size this back up here. Perfect. Now I'll do the same thing for state. Let's go up to 2 columns. Still doesn't show everything. 3 does, but it'd look really nice if it was lined up with employees. Let's do one more. So we have 3 rows of states and 4 columns of states. We'll size that up. And now give them a different color just to distinguish them a little bit. Maybe this one we'll click on here and go to a dark style. And for state, we'll click on this one, give it kind of a teal style. Now, let's go ahead and add our timeline in. So again, make sure you clicked on the pivot table, and then we'll go to Pivot Table Analyze and insert a timeline. Now, this will show any dates you have in your data. Right now, we just have order date. So we'll click that, click OK, and we get a timeline. Just like the slicers, it's a drawing object, so I can drag it over here and extend it all the way across the page. And that's it. Now we can use the timeline to filter dates too. That's really all there is to slicers and timelines. But before we go, I want to show you how to do some other formatting to really make this look like a cool dashboard. One thing you'll notice, if I have a big pivot table, if I start scrolling down to my data, those slicers and timelines scroll off the top of the page. So, what's a tool we've used before to make things not scroll? That would be freeze panes. So let me click on the pivot table. I'll go to View and Freeze Panes. And now when I scroll down, my slicers stay in place, as does my timeline. So if I want to just sort by Wisconsin, I can, wherever I am. It's really helpful. And one other trick I'll show you. Let's go ahead and take the freeze panes off for a second. So this makes sense. You know, I've got my slicers and timeline up here. I'm going to freeze the panes on row 17. But something that can make it even a little bit more clean, in my opinion, let's go ahead here and insert a row. Okay, now watch this. Let's make that row 1. Okay, so row 1's huge. It moved my slicers and timeline down, but let's go ahead and move those back up so that all of my slicers and timelines, except for customer name, will fit in row 1. Actually, let's even try customer name. Let's put that up there. Won't quite fit, but you know what we can do? We can move it over a little bit and give it a second column. So let's do that. 2 columns, resize it. And now I can actually delete a lot of these rows to bring them back up and do my freeze panes again. So now all of my slicers and timelines, or my pivot table controls, if you will, they're going to stay in view wherever I scroll because I froze the panes that way. So here, if I scroll up and down, all my controls stay up here, and I can filter using my slicers and timeline without them scrolling off the page. So that's it for slicers and timelines. Let's get ready for the next lesson.